Welcome to the Nerd Party.
I think people are perverts. I've maintained that. That's the foundation of my career.
Welcome to House of Fincher, the podcast on the Nerd Party Network that covers all of David Fincher's works in chronological order. And tonight is the night we've been waiting for. And as a very talented screenwriter once said shortly before he puked, better late than never. Joining me to discuss this movie that we've been waiting all year for is my good friends Tristan Riddell and John Mills. John, how are you doing today?
Well, I figured out how to replace all of the Seconal with bourbon, so I'm doing just fine. Thank you.
That's a good choice. That's definitely a good choice to do. Tristan, how are you doing? Way out there in the deserts, drying up?
It's weird. You guys are only coming in on one headphone on one side. It's almost like you're coming in mono. It's really weird. I don't know what to make of it. I'll try to suffer through though, and get this podcast done.
Just in case you listeners can't tell, we're talking about Mank, which is the new film by David Fincher, direct release to Netflix on December 4th, 2020. And this is what we've been leading up to. We've been discussing all of David Fincher's films in chronological order leading up to this. We're very excited to discuss this. And what this is a movie about the genius writer behind the film Citizen Kane. And it's a little bit about his life in a certain period of time. It's a movie about movies. It's a movie about movie making in the golden era of Hollywood, but also in the Depression, the war, World War II era. So there's lots of things going on. There's lots of interesting comments here. And, watching this, I couldn't help but notice what I think are probably some deliberate similarities to a recent election that may have happened in one of the superpowers in the planet here. But I don't know if we'll touch on that or not. But Tristan, you did bring it up here. And I wanted to ask you guys, when you guys watch movies, do you guys have a surround sound system at home, John?
No.
No? Tristan, do you have a surround sound system?
Yes, I do.
The audio that I had, I was getting a full 5.1 signal from my Netflix, and the audio that I had made it sound like I was sitting in a movie theater watching an old movie, and it was like the echo that you would hear from the back of a theater projecting a mono movie is basically what I heard in my rear channels.
No, I can confirm that effect was definitely there, because watching it just with television audio as I do, one of the first things I noticed during the first major exchange of dialogue was I said, "Oh my gosh, this sounds like, an old timey movie. Like this is what it sounded like, for the audio mix and being in the theater and everything back then." So yes, you didn't imagine it.
Mm-hmm. And then, so most like the dialogue came out of the center channel for me, and the music was coming out of my left and right. So it was a very interesting audio mix. So I think that a movie that I'm going to be making a couple of comparisons to is probably The Good German. I was thinking about this a lot while watching this. Steven Soderbergh wanted to make this black and white movie, and he wanted to make it with the film stock that they would have used, the cameras they would have used, the lenses they would have used. And so he made this film in 4:3 mono, with all this film and technology that they would have used back in the 40s. And then as I'm watching The Good German, the first time I started watching the movie, I actually stopped. I couldn't even finish it because of the language they used in it. There was so much foul language in the movie. Now, I don't have a problem with it, but when I'm watching that movie, I'm thinking to myself, why are you going through this effort to recreate a movie as it would have been created in the 40s and then put all this dialogue in it that you wouldn't have had in a movie in the 40s? And then watching this one, I kind of felt the same way, because I'm like, okay, so you're going through this effort, you're putting the cigarette burns in the corner, you've got a little bit of kind of glitch as if there might be like a frame that got caught, like a sprocket got caught or something like that. And then you make this and you release a 5.1 mix and you shoot it in 2:35:1 anamorphic. And I'm like, why would you make the decision to shoot it in 2:35:1 when you're trying to make a movie that's clearly trying to duplicate the experience of going to see a movie in the 40s? And I don't know, that stuck out to me as a very interesting choice. I wanted to know what you guys thought about that. John, let's go to you first.
Yeah. So basically, let me try to understand this. That what you're asking is, why was the artistic decision made to make it seem like a movie from back then in certain respects, but not in other respects?
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
That it's an inheritor basically of two different traditions, and I think that's straight up answered, I would say, from two different angles. I have no idea the definitive answer. I didn't read any interview with Fincher to get his reasoning behind it or anything. But if you're asking me to just sort of like spitball an idea, number one, I think because if he committed completely to the wholesale, this is a 4x3, et cetera, we're not shooting even in scope, and we're going to do mono audio and all of that, you're going to have people completely not even give it a chance, right? Like there's only so far you can push that envelope without sacrificing a significant portion of the audience. The three of us might sit down and watch and be like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what it would have been like to see a movie in 1942. And my wife would sit down and say, why does it look like an old television? And I'd be like, well, and I'd have to sit there and like explain it. And then I would say, Fincher being somebody who likes to play with the technical aspects, I wouldn't be surprised if he would make these sorts of decisions, because it specifically called out that it was shot in high dynamic range. Well, that obviously didn't, exist back then. So he's not just shooting in black and white for giggles. He's doing something more complicated with it to actually push that even further. So that seems to really strike a chord with the same guy we examined, where Panic Room basically became an obsessive diagrammed, experiment in what he could push with the technology at the time, sort of thing. So those would be my two guesses.
Now, one thing that I want to add is our buddy and fellow host on the network, Mike Schindler, he knows so much about theatrical distribution and history and projection and everything like that. The guy just has so much knowledge when it comes to that. Somebody asked him his opinion on the accuracy, specifically on the cigarette burns,
which I know are wrong,
with the changeovers. But no, listen to this. This is what Mike Schindler said. The movie is 2.39 by 1. So if this were a real print, it would be anamorphic. That means the circular cues should be stretched into ovals. However, anamorphic projection didn't exist until over 10 years later. So cues are period specific, but the aspect ratio is not. And because of that, the cues don't make sense one way or the other. He should have shot it in 1.37, and then none of this would have been an issue. But somebody snuck in and said, it's not 2.39 theatrically. In theaters, it's 2.20 by 1. And so that's when Mike changes his tune and says, oh, well, that changes things because that's a 70 millimeter ratio, which means it would have circular cues. But that's odd because the 70 millimeter ratio wasn't really used in the 40s. So it's accurate for the aspect, like cigarette burns were actually accurate for the aspect ratio is using, but that aspect ratio is not accurate for the time frame.
Interesting. Yeah. So, because that's what I noticed too. I'm like, these should be oval cigarette burns, right? But so that's interesting. If it was a 70 millimeter and 220 is 70 mil, then yes, those would be a circular one.
What I do find interesting, and especially from Fincher himself talking about this, like he shot it in black and white, so there's no color version of this film exists. Like, because it's easy to shoot a film like you normally would, and then you have that option of going either color or black and white in the edit bay. You're just like, hit the button, black and white. But one thing that a lot of people don't know is that you get a much wider range, tonal range of black and white when you shoot in black and white. And if I remember correctly, George Clooney did it for Good Night, Good Luck. Like he shot on black and white film stock because he knew that there was going to be no color version. And that was one reason that he gave. And with the camera, it was a special red camera, and I think it's called the monstrosity, like monostrosity, I think is what it's called. It's an 8K sensor that only shoots black and white, and the beauty of that is that so much more data can be packed in to the range of grays and black and whites and luma information. And so you can get so much more information packed into the frame for less trouble than you can with something where you have to deal with color range, with the full spectrum color range. And I think that's another reason why you would want to shoot definitely in black and white. But another thing is that he lost probably about a third of the resolution that he shot in to make it blurry and soft, to make it look like an old style film, but still get that kind of definition that Netflix wants you to get. And part of me is just like, why? Why shoot in 8K when you're going to lose all that resolution? And I'm sure that there's tons of people who have reasonings behind that as to why. But to me, it just feels like it's weird to add that to your workflow and your bottleneck of data when you know that you're going to be losing that much resolution.
What's always fascinating about these types of conversations is how much went into these decisions, how much work went into producing this. And I know it always seems like I'm throwing my wife under the bus, but I'm not doing that. I use her as a bellwether for when I'm going off the rails, being too concerned about things. And Netflix is in the business of getting people like her to watch, as well as people like me. She couldn't care less about any of this stuff, right? So what's always fascinating to me is that Fincher cares very deeply about this stuff. Netflix gives him the rope to do whatever he wants to do with it, and we can have this fantastic conversation. But at the end of the day, all that will ever matter is, was this movie compelling enough to keep the average movie watcher engaged for 2 hours and 12 minutes? That's what's so fascinating, is there is so much put into that. And I think that what's really interesting is that I think Mank is the first movie in a while where Fincher is dealing with subject matter that is a lot less accessible than a psychopathic woman setting up her husband for her own murder, than somebody having a psychotic break and imagining that he started fight clubs across the country, or a woman trapped in a house with her child as people are breaking in and they're trapped in a panic room. Like, those are all very accessible concepts. I honestly think that what comes to mind for me is The Game. The Game had a sort of accessibility issue. And I think Mank is very much in that territory of, I don't know if my wife, even if I talk her into trying to watch this, is going to care for the full 2 hours, or if she's just going to be, sure, it's a movie.
I think that's a very good point, because Aaron Reynolds, creator of Effin' Birds and Swear Trek, tweeted out the other day, he says, I wonder how accessible this movie is to people who've never seen Citizen Kane. You know, like, I've seen Citizen Kane, I've seen it numerous times, but this is a very niche market, this film. You've got people like us who are David Fincher fans who are going to see it just because it's David Fincher, and you've kind of got a group of people who are going to see it because they like Academy Award bait, Academy Award material type movies, and you got a group of people who are going to see this because they love film history and they like to see this kind of perspective. And, you know, a lot of those groups, like I would fall into all three of those kinds of groups, I would say. But the average consumer probably hasn't seen Citizen Kane. The average person that watches Netflix probably hasn't seen Citizen Kane. Now, Tristan, I know that you actually watched Citizen Kane before you saw this.
Yes.
But have you seen Citizen Kane before?
Oh, several times. Yes.
Yeah. John, have you seen Citizen Kane?
Yes. I've been in love with the film for decades. Yeah.
I remember the first time I saw Citizen Kane, I was too young and I hated it. I'm like, what is this slow, boring movie? But I was like 10 at the time. I'd rented it from the library. I'd heard about it, right? I was too young to see it. But I've grown to love it, and it is an absolute masterpiece of a film. But so this movie is about the writing of this controversial film. And it's really interesting because, you know, this kind of subverts everything that I know about the making of the movie. You know, because from my perspective previous to this, it was Orson Welles that was the person who made this decision and who decided to go against Hearst and like attack Hearst. And in this movie, it gives a completely different impression.
Well, there's a reason. There's a reason why this is subverting your impression, is because most of it's not true.
Of this movie?
Yeah.
Or of the real stuff?
No, a huge portion of Mank is not true.
Okay.
Most of it is not true. Like, anybody who watches this and thinks, like, I'm not trying to criticize this film for it not being true, but anyone who watches this cannot look at it from a perspective of history. It's got to be It's got to be like, does this give a feeling of Mank? Does this give a peek into his his psyche, into his rationale and everything like that? That's when it needs to be looked at. But like, no, huge swaths of this are not true.
This is the sort of topic that has absolutely torn at my soul as a movie buff and a history fanatic, that the touchstone I always go back to is Oliver Stone in a very pivotal year where both The Doors and JFK came out. And to an impressionable 16-year-old, it was like, oh man, wow. I had no idea this is what the story was. And then as you grow up and you read a little bit more, you're like, wait, okay. Yeah. Wow. That was all made up. What? The reason I always go back to it is because that was my big lesson about how easy it is to simply accept the text of a film that is presenting an historical story or a biopic and take it on faith. You're putting trust in the filmmaker not to lie to you.
Mm-hmm.
And unless there is a specific statement somewhere in the film that says, we're inventing a whole lot of this, if it's a compelling work, you're going to just buy into it. And you know what? I'll even to go beyond Oliver Stone. I point to Shakespeare. How everybody thinks Julius Caesar died and seized power all basically comes from Shakespeare. And like, he was just a filmmaker of the day. Basically, I know they were plays, but like, entertainment has warped history through all time. So I'm not surprised by that. But I will say, much like Brandon, I just sort of took it on faith that more than half of this was true, right? Like, because it's presented compellingly enough that I just shrugged and I said, sure, there are little bits he's filling in here and there, but most of this is true, right? So, but if it's not, then
I'll give some broad strokes here. Like, I don't want to bore everybody with the details.
Well, no, this is not boring. This is good stuff because here's the thing. Like, go ahead, Tristan. But I thought I knew the story of the making of Citizen Kane, and then this movie comes along, and I'm like, I've got a ton of questions right now here. Like, what's going on here? So, I think I've got a pretty good knowledge of how it was made. But go ahead, Tristan.
Well, it turns out that a big portion of Jack Fincher's script was based off of an essay that was written in 1971 that has been ripped to shreds ever since. I mean, it's based off of hearsay, it's based off of bias, and the person just really didn't do their proper research. They kind of found one source of information, and that's what they based their entire worldview on for Mank, Wells, and the making of Citizen Kane. And even like in 1972, someone wrote a counter essay saying, this is why everything you just said is wrong. But the essay did its damage because it got very popular and it kind of seeped in there. And if I remember correctly and read it correctly, that's where Jack Fincher got his influence. And David Fincher, this is a love letter to his dad. And so he wanted to stay true to his script, and that's what he made. So here's the broad strokes. Like, if you are listening to this podcast, you know what was said in the movie Mank, and you know what has happened in Mank. I'm not going to recount every single thing that he did, but I will tell you what was inaccurate. Mankiewicz wrote the first draft of Citizen Kane. It was called American. What they don't tell you in the movie is that Wells and Mank worked together for 5 weeks talking about what they wanted to do, who they wanted to target, and how they wanted to make the movie.
That's not mentioned at all in this film.
No, it very much wasn't. They worked together they didn't write anything, but they worked together for 5 weeks trying to get everything right before Mank went off to, his ranch, which he did, and write the first script. But another thing that they don't say is that while Mank was writing his first draft, Wells was writing his. And what happened is that Wells wrote a lot of scenes that made it into Citizen Kane. And Mank was very much responsible for the characters, the setting, and the framework. Like that was very much him. And he wrote a behemoth that was, I think it was like 226 pages, maybe more, of the first draft. And by the 7th draft, it was the shooting script is like the 7th draft was the shooting script, was brought down to 156 pages. Now, Mankiewicz did do the rewrites
with Wells for the second and third draft. Wells rewrote the script for the fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh draft by himself. So any way, shape, or form, and I'm not a Wells, I don't think Wells is a god. This is not coming from a fanatic here. But anyone who tries to take that away from Wells, Citizen Kane from Wells, is an idiot. He made Citizen Kane. A lot of what Mankiewicz wrote made it into the shooting script, but a lot of what Wells wrote made it into the shooting script. And also on top of that, it was RKO's idea to get a ghostwriter. Wells was saying, oh, wait, I don't know if I'm doing X, Y, and Z. I'm kind of busy right now. I don't know if I can get jump started on a first draft. And so I'm going to need somebody to write it with me. And they're like, that's fine. You can choose whoever you want. You can choose whoever you want, but they don't get credit because you're the golden boy. You're the wunderkind. And so we want the credits to say directed, produced, written, and starring Orson Welles. Orson's like, fine, that's what we'll do. And I get to hire whoever I want. He hired Mankiewicz. Mankiewicz agreed to get no credit. Once they argued back and forth to who was going to get credit, Wells and RKO said, like, fine, that's all right. But it was Wells's idea to give Mankiewicz top billing on the writing credit, which you'll notice in the credits of Citizen Kane, that Mankiewicz's name is first. That was Wells's idea. And then Mankiewicz started fighting with Wells in the press, saying that, Wells had nothing to do with the script. This was the greatest thing I ever wrote. And Wells, started yelling back during the press, but they never talked to each other again after that, if I remember correctly. That's the biggest thing that's wrong. So basically, the fundamental framework of Mank is based on a non-truth. It's based off of fiction. And also, Marion Davies is a year older than Mankiewicz. Amanda Seyfried is 27 years younger than Gary Oldman, and they weren't really friends. They just kind of knew each other. Like, they hung out in the same circles. Marion Davies' movies made money. She was one of MGM's top stars, not because of Hearst, but just because her movies made money. Like, she left on a high note. They even said in the movie, like, oh, her movies haven't made a dime in 10 years. No, not true at all. Not true at all. Hearst wanted Mank around because he liked how he talked, but then he got obnoxious and started drinking too much. And he also didn't want Marion Davies to be drinking, so he didn't keep heavy drinkers around him. And that's why he was kicked out of his house and out of his land, not because of political speeches or anything like that. What else that was just like gobsmackingly wrong? That's the biggest stuff. I know I'm forgetting.
But the thing is, and that's enough. And what I think that really speaks to is there is a decision on the part of a filmmaker, especially when they're making a quote unquote biopic, again, to reference back to The Doors or even the Buddy Holly story or that Queen movie that came out, right? Mm-hmm. You just want to tell a compelling story. And so you're not concerned, like documentaries are supposed to be the realm of facts. They aren't always, but they're supposed to be. And you have a situation where I can't fault Fincher for going down this road. I can't fault somebody for believing the 1971 essay or anything like that, because there are just tons of things. I mean, considering the fact, though, that the entire movie winds up about the creation of narrative and the perceptions of reality that can be shaped by it, that in and of itself, I would hope is intentional on Fincher's part to make it self-reflective, if you will. If it isn't, then it's ironic, I guess, because then that becomes a thing where it's self-reflective anyway without intending to be so.
And also, anybody who's listening, if I got any of that wrong or if I was egregiously wrong, I don't think I am, but please let me know. Like, go to thenerdparty.com/contact, select Houselights or House of Fincher from the menu, fill out the form, send us an email. You can also find us on social, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can find me personally on Twitter at The Insane Robin. Please be nice if you're calling me out, because I am asking for you to correct me.
And I will say that if you want somebody not to be nice about it, reach out to me, Kessel Junkie, on your social network of choice, and I will be the filter by which you can be mean to Tristan. More than happy to do it.
And I'm Brandon Mattel on Twitter.
And he's nice.
But
He's too nice to go after Tristan.
Brandon, after hearing everything that I just said, how are you feeling? What does that make you feel?
Okay, so this is what this makes me think. Okay, so this to me adds an extra layer to this movie, an extra fascinating layer to this movie. Because Citizen Kane, when it came out, everybody knew that it was about Hearst when it came out. Yet it's the truth of Hearst has been distorted. The facts of truth have been distorted. And so here we go. And we have this film that's come out in this time, in this period of like fake news and people seeing stuff and not reflecting and not investigating facts and trying to get to the truth of the story. We have that reflection in this movie as well. But we've also got this film that's not accurately presenting how this not accurately presented film was made. So it's almost like it's like the same kind of film that Citizen Kane was, just from the other point of view. Do you kind of get what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying.
Sure.
I don't know if I agree with it, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's like, they both deal with the idea of legends and stuff like that. And that brings me back, though, to sort of the technical aspects. The fact that this was constructed in such a way that called back to the very structure of Citizen Kane, I thought was one of its strongest things. I loved it every single time I would see, interior Mank's apartment, 1934 flashback. I was like, oh, once that happened I was like, oh, good, we're going to do this. I really enjoy this sort of thing, because that was a very accessible, means, I think, by which to tell the story. But I'm actually hung up because we are talking about, the movie about the making of Citizen Kane and everything. And we talked about, have you seen Citizen Kane before this? I want to put it out there. Do you think it's at all necessary to see Citizen Kane for this to be an accessible or interesting entertainment?
I feel like you either have to immediately watch Citizen Kane, or you have to have watched it before you watch this. I do not think it stands on its own.
What about you, Brandon?
I don't know. I've been thinking about that because I think the movie can be enjoyed on its own because the acting is there, the film production is there. How many people are going to go and see this without having that background? Like this is made for people who love this type of film, that this is based on. That they love Citizen Kane. They maybe not just Citizen Kane, but they love films of this era. So I don't know. Like I haven't seen Citizen Kane in a long time. I've seen it several times, but I haven't seen it in probably 15 years. I didn't watch it again for this just because I didn't have the time. And I don't know when I'll get around to watching Citizen Kane because, I just bought the 5 Scorpion King movie pack on Amazon that I'm going to have to watch first. So
you gotta have
priorities here, right?
Right.
Yeah. You got to have priorities, right?
Apples to apples, too,
I don't know that Citizen Kane is necessary. Like, I guess the only thing that I could compare it to recently, because I would be having trouble, is the recent Star Trek novel that came out, the autobiography of Catherine Janeway. Would somebody pick that up not having been a Star Trek Voyager fan? Probably not.
Or have never seen Star Trek Voyager.
Right. They wouldn't really catch the references. So I almost think that you have to have seen Citizen Kane prior to this in order to appreciate it in its full.
I'm going to be the contrarian in the group then.
Please.
I don't think it's necessary to see Citizen Kane. I think that this movie can stand on its own. I think that seeing Citizen Kane enriches it. I didn't watch it right before this either. Again, questions of time and stuff like that. I had to watch Muppet Christmas Carol and everything. So, I think if this film doesn't work on any level without having seen Citizen Kane, then in a sense, it's an artistic failure. But at the same time, I would respect it in a sense because it would be David Fincher taking Netflix's money and saying, ha ha ha, I made something not a lot of people are going to stream. Joke's on you,
I want to talk about that for a second. Okay, so he signed a 4-year contract deal with Netflix, an exclusive deal. So he's only going to be making Netflix content for the next 4 years. Knowing him, who the hell knows what that means?
Another movie in 4 years.
Yeah, because it was 6 years between Gone Girl and this?
Yeah.
But he did make, House of Cards and Mindhunter in between, but still, movie-wise. So with that, he kind of joked where he said, he's like, this is a 4-year deal, I think, that kicks in after Mank. He's like, Mank is going to be the test where if it does well, then I'm going to be the asshole who goes to them and says, I'm going to shoot the next film in black and white. And if it doesn't do very well, I'm just going to go to them and say, okay, what do you want me to do?
And Mindhunter season 3.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And so one thing that I was thinking about is this was the perfect movie to make to start off a contract. Because here's the like a contract specifically with Netflix. Because what does Netflix care the most about? Subscribers, eyeballs on the screen. That's what they care about. They want this movie and every movie they make or fund to get as many eyeballs on the screen as possible. What's the second most thing that they care about, John or Brandon, besides eyeballs on the screen?
They want to get prestige.
Prestige. They want to be taken as seriously as possible. They want to be seen as one of the big boys. They want to be a top dog at the table. They want to be like Warner Brothers. They want to, they want to be like Sony. Like they want to be like Disney. They want to be seen that way when it comes to making movies. Now, obviously, they're the top dog in streaming, but with making original movies, they want to be seen that way. So Fincher is a freaking genius because if he gets a lot of eyes on the screen, then that's fine. That's what he set out to do. That's what Netflix wants him to do. If he doesn't, he has clearly made Oscar bait because this gives an Oscar baity performance with Gary Oldman. Amanda Seyfried does a great job. But on top of that, the industry loves watching movies about their own industry.
Yes, they do.
And they give copious amounts of awards to movies that are about making movies. I love watching movies about making movies because I love movies and I love behind the scenes information. So if this movie doesn't get a lot of eyeballs, it's going to get Oscar buzz.
True. Very, very true.
Which will generate eyeballs.
Which will in then turn generate eyeballs just later on. And so it is a win-win scenario for Fincher. It is a safe scenario for Fincher.
And it's actually, in the current environment with the way things have changed, that's an even safer and better bet because Netflix simply has it sitting there. It's not something that somebody has to go seek out and buy. Like a studio can release Oscar bait, but then after it wins the Oscar, the person has to go through and they have to say, okay, well, where can I stream it? Where can I buy it? Where can I rent it? Well, oh my gosh, is it on Redbox? Whereas they can say, this Netflix movie won an award, and people will just know, go to Netflix and see it. So yeah, they actually shortened part of the journey right there. That's a great point.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's my perspective on it.
We talked a little bit about the structure. I don't think we need to talk too much about the movie structure and the plot of the movie now. I think we could probably move on to the actors.
Yeah,
the acting
sure.
in the film. So let's start with Gary Oldman. So I don't know much about Mankiewicz. I don't really know much about this guy. I think that the fascinating thing is that he's done this movie. I looked up his career and I'm like, I don't know that I've heard of any of these other movies that he's written. So would this be his best? Well, would Citizen Kane be his best film? Probably. But what do we think of Gary Oldman's performance with this? John, let's start with you.
I thought it was a fine performance. I thought it was good. Did it knock my socks off? I'm taking that as a subtext of the question. Not really. But I think that sometimes I come into an Oldman performance with a chip on my shoulder because he's had so many incredible performances through his career that I sit down and I'm like, all right, Gary, wow me. And this is not a wow type of performance. So recalibrating myself after I, took a day to think it over and stuff like that, I think this is a really strong performance. I think because I believe in the person of Mank. I believe in the construct that Oldman and Fincher have put together here. I believe in this person and his existence. If I believe in the person and their existence, then it's a successful performance. The next bar is with somebody who's a name like Gary Oldman. Do I ever at any point stop seeing Gary Oldman? Is there a point at which I say, that's not Gary Oldman? Or I have to remind myself, oh, wow, that's him. I don't think it ever crosses that threshold, but that's not a threshold by which I think you can really give, too much weight. That's like bringing in your own baggage and biases and stuff like that. So I think it's a very strong performance. I think it's a believable performance, and I think that he creates a human being that I think exists.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's pretty accurate. And it is hard to judge a chameleon for not being a chameleon because they can't be that way all the time. I mean, not everybody's Hugh Grant, John. They can't just disappear into the role.
You got to have different standards for people. You got to separate them out. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think while I was watching it, like, he made me laugh. He intrigued me. I believed that this was a real person. I can't really add too terribly much to what you said, John, because I agree with it. I think that's pretty spot on. I think probably my favorite scene with a Gary Oldman performance was where he didn't say anything at all. Is when they were going to the party on election night.
Yeah.
His wife turned to him and said, if you don't have anything nice to say, just don't say anything at all. And then he goes to table one and everyone is saying some asinine things to him. And he's just like putting his hands up in like in prayer, just kind of like, and like he puts it on his chest and like looks like he's deeply gratified. And he just doesn't say anything to like the first 4 questions or things that people say to him. And I never related to a situation more than that.
That's true. That's probably, that is his best scene in the film, I think.
I really enjoyed Oldman in this, and there was multiple times in the film that I was lost to him, and I wasn't seeing Gary Oldman, and I was seeing this character of Mank on the screen. So I thought his performance was absolutely fantastic, and it was interesting knowing a little bit about the behind the scenes where they didn't put any makeup on him or anything like that. They just kind of left him be who he is to portray this role was actually quite interesting. I mean, I think it was fantastic, but I don't got much more to say. Tristan, you're right. That was the scene. I definitely loved it the first time I watched it. I did get around to watching it twice, but when he's not saying anything and just smiling, I'm like, yes. Oh boy, I've been in those situations before myself.
Although I will say that another moment that's terrific is when I forget the other character's name, but when the wife says he had a whole box of shells. The look that washes over Oldman's face. Yeah. No, where he just realizes, oh no. Like that is a tremendous moment of acting because you can actually see that emotion play over his face the way it would with a real person. I'm just throwing that out there because we all praise the same moment. I think that moment is worth attention as well.
Absolutely. And Brandon, you brought up, makeup and everything like that. Gary Oldman wanted to have prosthetics, so he looked more like Mankiewicz. And Fincher had to talk him out of it and say, like, no. I want an intimate performance. I want to be in on your facial expression, your eyes, and everything like that. But John, I think if they did go the way of prosthetics, I think you would have gotten that Gary Oldman performance. I feel like he would have lost himself more in the performance, and it would have stripped away his own mannerisms and his own ego and everything like that, and kind of thrown himself a little bit further into a different style of Mankiewicz. I think that definitely would have happened if there was more prosthetics on him, or any prosthetics on him.
So I want to talk next about the guy that played Orson Welles, and I'm bad with names here, so Tristan, I'm going to get you to help me out a little bit here.
Tom Burke.
So this was I think a really good choice, because while he didn't quite look like Orson Welles, he looked enough like Orson Welles that I think it was a good fit. But to me, the performance of Welles and the voice of Welles were spot on.
Yeah, he had a good voice. Like he didn't really look like him. They tried to cover it up a little bit with facial hair, but I mean, he definitely had the mannerisms down. Like he had the voice down.
Mm-hmm.
He was most recently in The Crown. I think most people have probably seen him in Only God Forgives. But yeah, I think it's with Welles, it's really the voice that sells it.
Yes, and I think that because you were talking about prosthetics a moment ago with Oldman, I think that what helps sell him and get you to accept him, ironically, is the fact that the first time you see him, he's wearing prosthetics for a screen test. So it sort of clouds how much he actually looks like Welles. And so you just sort of like, I honestly think that wound up being a great bridge for me to accept him as Welles, because the first time I saw him, they made it very obvious he wasn't supposed to look exactly like him. And so it almost worked like a subconscious trick to say, I will accept him because, these are the prosthetics and all of that stuff.
I was pretty excited to see Charles dance again. Was the last time we saw him was in Alien 3 with Fincher? Was that the last time?
Yeah.
I was stoked to see him as Hearst, but we didn't really get that much.
I think what we got was great, though.
Yeah, like especially the monkey grinder thing at the end.
Yes, that was fantastic. But I think also, again, just with facial expressions and stuff like that, Fincher always gets great performances out of people. And the party scene where Amanda Seyfried is like, oh, well, Charlie picked the whole cabinet after all. And the look he gives is like, oh, wow. He's consciously like that. Like if I saw somebody give me that look, I'd be like, well, I'm going to die at some point later tonight. So I'm going to leave now.
She just got up and left. She's like, oh, I'm gone. Okay, goodbye.
Yep. Toodles.
Now the dinner scene, it's funny that you talk about facial expressions and everything like that. The dinner scene in infamous Fincher form took 100 to 200 takes.
Oh, for Pete's sake.
The whole dinner scene. And it got to the point where like Gary Oldman was at his breaking point. Like Gary Oldman and Fincher are friends. They actually
were friends.
Yeah, right.
It gets even weirder because they married the same woman. Let me rephrase that a little bit better. David Fincher was married to, I'm blanking on her name, married to a woman from 1990 to 1995. And Gary Oldman was then married to that same woman from 1997 to 2001. And they both had children with her. So their children are half siblings with each other.
That is just, I want to see a movie
that
about
is Hollywood in a nutshell.
No. I want to see a movie about that. That's the relationship I want.
If you ask them, then all you have to do is watch Gone Girl. Because both marriages apparently ended epically. So yeah, they know each other. They're friends, which is funny. Gary Oldman, like after doing his 100th take, stopped and said, "David, I have done this speech 100 times," and he's like, "Yeah, that's right. And this is 101. Action."
But see, you know what's funny about that to me? About the number of takes and everything is I know that the reason is because it's compression. It's you're doing 100 takes in a row sort of thing. But there is a mindset in live theater that live theater performances, they evolve over time and they get better. Or they ebb and flow. Sometimes later performances are not as good, earlier or better, like that sort of thing. So in a sense, it's if Oldman had been on a long-running Broadway show, he would have done those 100 and something takes of the same speech, and he would have brought those same variations, and he would have done these sort of different moves, but he would have done them over 120 days as opposed
a couple
to
of months.
Yeah. And so it's, I can understand somebody being at the breaking point, but at the same time, it's sort of exhilarating to think of it as somebody who doesn't have to do it, to be like, oh, that sounds so exhilarating. But who I really feel sorry for are the people who had no lines, who had to sit there, because I would have been the one saying, can we rewrite this so I storm out earlier in the speech or something? Can I just please go have a smoke or something, please?
It's really funny that you bring that up because Amanda Seyfried, she didn't have any lines in that scene, but yet she had a camera on her most of the time. And she said, she's the one who said, we did 200 takes and I didn't even have any lines. And she started getting really frustrated. But then and again, it's funny that you brought this up. She said, she's like, I had to look at it like theater, like doing it several times over and over and over and over and over again. And she kept wondering, like, what am I doing that needs 100+ takes? What am I doing wrong with my hands? Or something else.
Yeah.
Like, and it's got to be maddening to that point where you're just like, this, okay, so I don't have any lines. Am I twitching? Like, is my eyebrow going in the wrong direction? What on earth could you possibly need? And poor Kirk Baxter, going through all of those takes, trying to edit that together. That just sounds like an absolute nightmare. But what did you guys think of Amanda Seyfried as Marion Davies?
I'm glad you used that. I was going to say we should segue in because you had mentioned her and everything.
And thus calling on the segue takes away from its magic. But please continue.
Well, I'm all about taking away from magic, much like finding out that most of this movie was BS. But I think that Seyfried was amazing. I did like, she's an actress that I've always respected. I think that she's a fine actress. And I think that Fincher did what Fincher does. He brought out something even more special. I think of all of the performances in this, the person I lost, the two people I lost most as the actors I know outside of this would be Charles Dance and Amanda Seyfried. I thought that they were amazing, and I also believed their relationship. I absolutely believed what was happening between them. And I absolutely believed, as Mank's wife says at one point, in the platonic love affair that he had with her, right? It was not consummated, but there was feeling between them. And I think that she sold it. I think that she deserves a lot of recognition for why this film works at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, and that's the problem, right? Is you can sit there and you can have a breakdown like Gary Oldman. You can have a breakdown like we talked about with Robert Downey Jr. in Zodiac. But the results, Fincher gets these performances. And so how can you really question his methods?
I'm glad you said that about Seyfried, because I think I liked her performance the most in this. I thought she was the most believable. She was the most likable. And she sold the relationship with Hearst. She sold the relationship with Mank. And she kind of had this quiet dignity about her. And it would have been easy to play her off as the person in as her character in Citizen Kane. It would have been easy to show her as a gold digger. And that would have made her one-dimensional, but she did not play her one-dimensional. She was funny, she was classy, but she still stuck her foot in her mouth a couple of times, because apparently that's what Marion Davies did every once in a while. It doesn't make you dumb. It just means like, oh, that crap that happened, And I really, really enjoyed her performance, and I stopped seeing her, and I started just believing that it was Marion Davies.
Yeah, she was definitely a gem in this film, that's for sure. Her interactions with Gary Oldman, they were such a joy to watch together on screen. Like every scene that they had it was filled with all these little glances at each other, these little looks at each other. And there was, even when other people were talking, there was so much subtext that was going on between these two people who clearly had a mutual respect for each other in this film that we're seeing here. So I don't really know her for much other than, like, I just looked up her filmography. The only thing on Letterboxd that I've seen that she's in is Twin Peaks, and I think I know her best. I'm pretty sure she was in Big Love, and I think she was really good in Big Love, but I mean, I don't really know her work outside of this now.
I don't know her work too terribly much, but my absolute, and I'm not trying to be funny here, but my absolute favorite thing she's ever done, hands down, is Mean Girls. It's just absolutely amazing. She did such a hilarious job in Mean Girls. And she was also, she played Cosette in Les Mis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I thought she was really good in that too. But I think in terms of performances, I do want to bring up that I think somebody who will get overlooked unfairly, because I thought he did a terrific job, was Arliss Howard. He was the one who played Louis Mayer. And I thought that he did a terrific job of playing that sort of disconnected CEO level a-hole sort of thing, but he gets to deliver that punch at the end to Mank when he stands up and he gives that scene is so earned at that moment. You actually wind up this guy who, because you see him through Mank's eyes as this unfeeling, cold, calculating studio head who screws everybody out of part of their paycheck, spinning the whole thing about we're a family and we got to come together as a family. And he's this, turns into this evil political mover and shaker and everything like that. He still conveys this humanity throughout the entire performance, that when you get to that moment where he tells Mank off, you're kind of on his side saying, he's really got a point here.
Yeah, that look that he gives too, when they're sitting there and Mank is giving that spiel and he's just giving that look, he's just like, you can't see me right now, but it's just like, I don't know, it's just priceless. He does it.
I was going to say, great podcasting.
Great podcasting acting here. So sorry, listeners, but that you know what I'm talking about. He scrunches his face up and he's just like, yeah, looking at Mank like that.
So what didn't work for this film for you guys? Like, we got to talk about it.
I will honestly say that I've been looking forward to this conversation, because after the film was over, I really started thinking about it. And I said, I'm not ready to even rate this on Letterboxd or anything like that. I really wanted to think about it. Now, that's a compliment in a lot of ways, because it gave me something to think about. But at the same time, what I was left with was I didn't really feel the emotional connection with the story that I wanted. As much as I could admire and respect and praise the technical aspects, the emotional connection wasn't as strong. Like, it wasn't really there in a lot of ways. I think that left me a little bit flat. I think that it was maybe a little bit longer than it needed to be. I think that it could have gotten to the point in less than 2 hours and 12 minutes. Was it 2 hours and 10? I don't know. But it's definitely something where after it hit a certain point, there was too much coasting, and it needed to, especially after that big emotional punch at the end, it needed to tighten it up and get to the finish line a little bit quicker. And probably there were a couple of other things throughout. One thing, because we talked about performances and everything like that, and I'm not bashing the performance here, but casting Bill Nye as Upton Sinclair just took me out of that moment
totally
so badly.
Took me out of it.
I was actually angry about it because I said, how can you do that? Don't do that to me unless you're trying to paint something where it's like, well, Bill Nye is the next Upton Sinclair and should be the governor of California. Like, unless you're trying to say something like that, don't do that type of thing.
I didn't catch that it was
so
him on my first
weird.
viewing. It was the second viewing. I'm like, is that Bill Nye?
Yeah.
No, as soon as we heard him over the megaphone, before we even saw him, I was like, that can't be Bill Nye. Like, there's no way that's Bill Nye. And then we see his face, and I'm like, that's freaking Bill Nye.
Yeah, and it's just it's not. I don't know. I'm sure he had his reasons and everything like that, but I just didn't. It wasn't a good choice.
John, again, you're reading my mind tonight. Like, I don't quite know what I can. I mean, it's too long. It needs to be tighter. Once we have that emotional payoff with the emotional climax of the film, we need that denouement to hit quicker. To me, this was a boring film. I was bored. I was bored while I was watching it. I didn't see Fincher. I didn't see him in it, and that's not a criticism of the filmmaker. I have plenty of criticisms for Fincher, but like that in itself is not a criticism, because it's cool if you want to stretch yourself. It's cool if you want to try something different, if you want to go into a different direction and try different styles. I think Fincher himself even said, he's like, I kind of want to go into my Picasso phase and see what works and see what I can do and work in the emotional realm that I'm currently at. And I think that's interesting. And I definitely am interested to see what that looks like. But for this film particularly, once I was done watching this film, I turned to my wife, who's a huge Fincher fan. I said, if you didn't know Fincher directed that, would you be able to say Fincher directed that? She said no. I was like, if you didn't know Fincher directed that, would you ever watch this film again? She's like, no. And I was like, yeah, me too. If this wasn't Fincher, I would never watch this film again. I would go, box checked. I watched Mank. No need to revisit. But because I love Fincher's work so much, yeah, I'm going to watch again, see if it grows on me.
Mm-hmm.
But I echo everything that John said, but add on top of it, I was bored. I felt no emotional connection, and I don't feel the need to watch again. I will, but I don't feel that need. And that's rare.
For me, in this film, the one problem that I had, the dialogue was a little bit delivered a little too quickly for me. Like, it was very, very snappy dialogue. And I really wanted to make sure that I watched it again a second time before we discussed it. And I put the subtitles on for the second one. And part of the reason is because as a Canadian, I don't know a lot about your politics. And like, there's a lot of names dropping and like events that are happening that I'm just not too familiar with. And they're delivered as in a way that it's like you should know who these names are that they're talking about.
You should be an informed viewer, like they drop them very casually. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, so I did have trouble with that. The first time I watched it, I was certain I missed plot elements because the dialogue seemed to be going so quickly for me. I understood the story a little bit better on the second viewing, and I realized I didn't miss as much as I thought that I did, right? But I mean, there was a lot of with the grand speeches and stuff that they were talking, and the way that Mank spoke was in a very writerly way, right? So it was very colorful descriptions that he used and stuff like that. And so I think I was catching more of what he was saying and the subtleties of what he was saying by having that second view and having the subtitles on at that time. But I don't know if I think the film was too long, but I agree with you, Tristan, in that I had a hard time seeing Fincher in this film. And I didn't have a problem with that because there is one spot where I did see something very Finchery. It made me think a lot of The Social Network in the rowboating scene, was the GOP dinner. And when they're cutting back and forth between like the people talking on the microphone and they're cutting to the board with the numbers and all the people in the audience like smoking and stuff like this, those two felt very similar and felt like they were made by the same person to me. But that's honestly the only spot where I actually saw something Fincher. And that was something stylistic that he brought to that scene. But it also felt out of place in the film because that's not something that would have been done in the 40s. You know, that type of editing.
What's funny is that whole question of like, where do you see Fincher? The only thing that occurred to me, because of course, you know, I tried to look at it through that lens, was the cigarette burns. Because I thought, oh, he's the only guy that's going to be able to put something like that in as a callback to his earlier works and know that somebody like one of the three of us is going to say Fight Club, right? Like we're the old, you know, like that's the sort of thing. And that was just a little bit too subtle. I would want to revisit, I think, the ending part of it. I can see in my head the way it's playing out what you're talking about, Brandon, but there was nothing about it that struck me in the same sort of, it didn't have the same deftness of execution that things in The Social Network did. And so I almost wonder if they were going for it and then they were caught in this thing where they said they couldn't push as hard as that because they'd done this other style. And so they basically fall into this trap where they hamstring themselves with something they wanted to do because they were so slavishly trying to ape something that had come before.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you guys would like to address? Anything you want to talk about?
One thing I'd like to ask you about is the music.
Right. That's what I was going to say. The score.
I really like the score. There was a lot of parts in it where it felt very true to a film of the era. And there was a lot of times when it didn't. Like some of the more beboppier score, like jazzier kind of score, felt like something that would have come like maybe another decade later or something like that, maybe another 15 years later. But for the most part, it was a very true score, and I'm very surprised that Reznor and Ross did this because it's very different from the works that I know that they've done.
Yeah, like none of it was electronic, which I think is crazy.
It was a beautiful score. It was a really, really beautiful score, and I loved it a lot. And I'm looking forward to getting a physical copy of this. I know that you can stream like 52 tracks of this somewhere right now. I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet. So far, all my context is in the film. But this is a fantastic score, and there should definitely be an Academy Award nomination for these guys again.
If there is an issue with the music, quote unquote, or whatever, or a criticism, I should say, it's that I think that this is one of those scores that is so paired up with what is on screen that I don't think that it works separated from it. I would want to listen to it as well, but I don't think that there's anything to this that would have me listening to it the way that I listen to, say, the Interstellar soundtrack. And that's not saying that it's a bad thing. It's just this is not the type of thing where I'm going to sit down and I'm going to say, I'm going to put on the Mank score, or I'm going to get the Mondo 4 LP version with limited edition art or anything like that. I know that Tristan will, but I wouldn't.
See, but that's the interesting thing about movie scores. And, you know, I've got a friend that we go back and forth with on Twitter all the time. Like the primary purpose of a film score is to pair it up with the film that you're watching. And I mean, like with somebody like Reznor and Ross, when they did Gone Girl, you know, they created like 3.5 hours of music for a 2.5 hour movie. And it's up to Fincher to find the spot to put it. So on one hand, it's created without much more than the feel of the movie in mind. And then on the other hand, Fincher's picking and choosing where he wants it to go, you know? And so like this movie, the movie music is first and foremost designed to support the movie. And it doesn't have to work outside of the movie. It's just a lot of movie music does work outside of the movie. As movie fans, we've seen movies many, many times, and we listen to the scores in conjunction with the images. And so when we listen to that score outside of the movie, we can still picture those images, you know? All
I'm saying is that the truly transcendent, the truly magnificent ones, in my opinion, are ones that I can listen to. And yeah, I can picture the film along with it, you know, and those sorts of things. But I'm basically just saying this doesn't belong in what I would call like John Williams' Superman bucket, right? that Superman score from 1978, you can just turn it on. Even if you've never seen the film, you're like, well, oh my gosh, what is this wonderment I'm listening to? This is the sort of thing where I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool background music. That works. That sort of thing.
So do we dip in to rankings here?
Why don't you rate it first?
Oh, we got to rate it first. Woo.
Yeah, let's
Tristan, I think we got a 2 coming from you.
This one's bottom of the barrel for me.
Oof.
I did not like this film. I did not hate it. When I was watching it, I didn't feel like it was excruciating. Like, like we've all watched bad movies. We've all watched a movie that pissed us off. We're like, why am I watching this? This is horrible. I hate this. I did not hate this. I don't think Fincher can make a film that I hate, but I was just uninterested. I was, like I said, I was bored. I was just like, oh, okay, I guess we're moving on here. We're going to this scene. We're going on to this. Okay, whatever. I didn't emotionally connect with anybody. And also because I'm such a Citizen Kane fan and I've researched the film, I've studied the film, like, I've talked about it in school. And so I know a lot about the backstory. It was hard to reconcile all the stuff that was happening on screen because I'm like, well, this didn't happen. That's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's weird because that didn't happen. And it was a little hard to reconcile that. But here's the thing is that like Kingdom of Heaven, if someone put a gun to my head and said, what's your favorite movie? I'd say Kingdom of Heaven, the director's cut. So much of that movie is historically inaccurate, crazy inaccurate. And I know that it's inaccurate, but I love it. I love it to death. And it's a great film, regardless of the historical inaccuracies. One's an action film and, like one is it's very different. I'm not saying it's an apple to apple, but it just kind of shows that with historical inaccuracies, I can get past them. With this one, I wasn't able to. So I'm kind of teetering on 2.5, 3, most likely 2.5 stars from me.
Wow, you have just been kicked off of the House of Fincher podcast for good.
You're never allowed to come back, ever.
This could be my last episode ever of House of Fincher.
I will say that I'm not as harsh with it as Tristan is. I was waiting to sift through my feelings after this discussion. I knew that it was not going to be a 5-star. I thought that, we were talking about just out of respect for the technical aspects, at least a 4 out of 5. But I honestly got to say I wound up at about 3.5 because of that lack of emotional connection. And most likely it's getting an extra half because I so admire what he technically did. I don't feel any compulsion either to go back and rewatch this, which is odd. Because I am used to David Fincher films being an experience where I say, yeah, I could watch that again. Okay. I don't feel a real desire to go back and rewatch it. And I guess it's just strictly because it just doesn't make the connection that it needs to. It's unfair in a sense, but I'll go all the way back to the work print of Alien 3. That has the emotional connection with the main character coming into it. That has a lot of different interesting aspects and themes that it's dealing with, stuff that even if it doesn't work, I'm saying, wow, okay, this is really sort of connecting with me on a heart level, if not a head level, and vice versa. Whereas with this, I just look at it and say, okay, well, this is an okay biopic. That's just really technically well done. It has some great scenes, has some great performances in it, but there's nothing about it that lights me on fire.
I think with the technical aspects, that could bump me up to a 3. Basically, that's like saying giving it an A for effort. Like when it comes to the technical aspects, because I think a lot of people often overlook that. Like when you look at movies that have fantastic CGI, but yet a subpar script, you still need to consider what that movie is doing and how it's pushing the boundaries of art and science, not just, is it a good movie? Like, is it an enjoyable movie? That kind of thing. I think that always needs to be taken into consideration. So I think that could bump it up to a 3, which would still be my lowest rated Fincher film, is a 3 stars. Because like the next one up would be The Game at 3.5.
Well, I'm glad that you love The Game so much now.
The Game is better than that, but whatever.
I love this movie both times I watch it, and I enjoyed it more the second time that I watch it. And I really do want to see this movie again. I don't know when I'm going to get to it, but I would like to see this again. I'm going to hopefully try and watch this. I got a week coming off before Christmas here. I'm going to try and watch it again during that week, I think. Part of the reason that it hits for me is because I do love this era of movie making so much. Most of my preferred films from this era are not American films. They're, French films or Japanese films of this era, but I really do love this era of filmmaking, and I love how they sound. I love how they look. I love 4:3 aspect ratios on old movies. So maybe there'll be a Blu-ray release of this that might have the 4:3 option on the second disc. We'll see what happens. But I like this movie a lot. It's not my favorite Fincher film, but I would still give this a 5. I am completely captivated by Oldman's performance in this film. I think he is stunning in this movie. I love him. I think he's really fantastic, and I think there's a lot of really great secondary characters in this. The technical filmmaking here is wonderful, and it's for a film fan like me, it's really fun to watch a movie that's been given this much care and attention to make it feel like it's of this era. I think it's pretty cool. That said, obviously I've given it a 5 because that's all that I can do. Let's talk about the rankings. So if you guys are okay, I'll go with my rankings first. So my bottom film is The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Coming in at number 10 is Alien 3. Fight Club in position 9. 7 in position 8. Zodiac in position 7. Mank in position 6. And then my top 5, Gone Girl number 5. The Game number 4. Panic Room number 3. Social Network number 2, and my top Fincher film is Girl with a Dragon Tattoo.
All right, so for me, number 11, Mank. As I said, bottom of the barrel. 10, The Game. 9, Panic Room. 8, Zodiac. 7, Alien 3. 6, 7. 5, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. 4, The Social Network. And here for the top 3, Gone Girl, Fight Club, and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
John, what do you got?
As it stands right now, I'm probably going to slide Alien 3 down at the bottom slot. Next up will be Mank. And keep in mind, though, that between those two, I'd be more likely to watch the Alien 3 work print than Mank again at this point. But Mank, for some reason, I think just because of the fact that it's a more complete film with more control over it, I sort of give it a technical edge there. So they're sort of like tied for last.
In a just recent interview when Fincher was talking about Mank, he said it's crazy that I've been in this career for 40 years and have only made 10 movies. He's like, well, I kind of inherited one, but it's really only 10. And he's still, to this day, he will not accept Alien 3.
Yeah. That's kind of crazy. Next up is Panic Room. Then we move up to The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, Social Network. And these are the ones where they can jockey Dragon Tattoo, Fight Club, The Game, and Zodiac as of today. Zodiac is just up at the top of it. I did just this last viewing. I've gone back and forth thinking about it again and again, and just like how much. I just think it's just an incredible journey. Anyway, that's where I stand right now.
For everyone who's listening, if you go to thenerdparty.com and you find our show, you will be able to see our letterbox list linked. So if you want to dissect them and really go after us, you can do so by going to thenerdparty.com.
John and Tristan, thank you guys so much for doing this with me. This has been my dream podcast since I started podcasting. I'm like, I want a reason to go back and visit all of David Fincher's films. And as soon as I heard Mank was coming out, I'm like, I got to do it. This is the time. And I reached out to the both of you because I couldn't think of anybody better to do this little project with me. And so I'm so grateful that you guys took the time with this. This has been a lot of fun. This has been probably my favorite podcast to do in a while. And it was such a treat to be able to go through my favorite film director's films with a couple of friends who clearly don't like him as much as I do because they didn't rate them all 5 stars. But that's
very
okay.
True. Empirically, factually true.
No, this has been an absolute blast to do. And the thing is, guys, and audience, is that we had way more fun doing this specifically with each other
than we thought we were going to, and we knew it was going to be a good time, but we had no idea it was going to be this good of a time. And so we are not just doing House of Fincher. This is no longer a mini series. We're going to continue on, and the next episode is going to be House of Nolan. That's why we're going to be changing the name, because we're going to be doing the directorial works of Christopher Nolan. And I know some film Twitter people are rolling their eyes. We're like, why aren't you doing some obscure French filmmaker so that you feel better about yourselves and you can strangle yourself in your own scarf? That is of course decorative. But no, we're going towards our favorites. And if that's not hipster for you enough, you know what? That's fine. But we love Fincher, we love Nolan, and we're going to keep going on. And it's been so much fun, and we cannot wait for you guys to listen. And please make sure to go and tell your friends about it, share it. And also, it takes 30 seconds to give us a review, so please take the time.
Tristan, where can people find you when you're not enjoying the technical aspects of Mank?
Real quick, you can find me at The Insane Robin on Twitter, as well as Letterboxd. You can find me all over thenerdparty.com. I've done a couple of archive shows. Really click around, because we've got great stuff for everyone. Star Trek shows, Star Wars shows, movie shows, TV shows. We got stuff for Babylon 5, Doctor Who, Harry Potter. It's something for everyone. I'm coming at you every single day of the week, so please check it out.
John, where can people find you when you're not doing your greatest podcasting work ever?
Well, you can find me pining away for it as the username Kessel Junkie on your social network of choice. KESSELJUNKIE. Occasionally I write over on kesseljunkie.com, sometimes even share art. So, check it out over there. And you can find me here on the Nerd Party Network co-hosting a Star Wars podcast called Aggressive Negotiations, where we do not dither and waste our time with simple conjecture and release schedules. We dive deep into the Star Wars galaxy. It's a lot of fun. So go ahead and check us out over on Aggressive Negotiations. But Brandon, where can people find you?
Well, when I'm not having platonic affairs with my friends Tristan and John here on this podcast, you can find me over on Twitter at Brandon Matella. You can find me on the United Federation of Podcast Network, which is my own network. I have a show called Infinite Diversity, which is a Star Trek podcast all about new Trek. I have a podcast called Franchise Fatigue, which is all about movies, remakes, and sequels. And you can find me on the Fandom Podcast Network with my friends Chris and Tom. We have a podcast very similar to this, where we go through Hitchcock's films in chronological order, and that's called Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock Podcast. Well, that's all we got for you this week. Until next week, when we return with Christopher Nolan's first film, Following.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.